Welcome to another video. I do pray that you take this channel very seriously if you've had the opportunity to come across it. And I'm going to do my best to present a video that it's going to summarize a lot of information. It's going to tie up some connections with the cross and which person you might have upon it. And then we will see a certain person that is seeking to double cross you with it. And then we will see someone who has freed you upon this cross of the double, freed you from the double vision, freed you from the box of limits, freed you from the limited material form in which so many people have sought to imprison themselves permanently. We're looking at what is known as a phylactery, and the caption reads below: an Orthodox Jewish man wearing the traditional phylactery, or frontlet, on his forehead. Very key word when we say forehead, because it will intrinsically link up with the cube in relative terms of its 2D imagery as a box, a four-sided box, which will then be relative to four dimensions of material reality discernment linked with height and time. This cube or phylactery should be instantly recognizable to many of you in the association of the black cube, which so many people on YouTube would refer to in connection with Saturn, which is then connected to time. And I'm going to show you a different way to see how all this fits. We're going to go from this Orthodox Jewish man here practicing his tradition, in which my guess would be he does not know what has originally inspired this tradition. In other words, he don't know where it's come from. If he don't know where it's come from, he might not know where it's going. And we're going to be able to crack, so to say, this egg, this open source code, by comparing it to another individual that believes himself to be an Orthodox Jew. You would have to recall Ephraim, and then you would have to recall the videos that I did on Ephraim and Manasseh in the connection to Genesis 48-49 that declare out of Jacob's own mouth that Ephraim would now be Israel. Ephraim, of Egyptian descent on his mother's side, Asneth. She is the daughter of the high priest of On. We know that this is associated with the white brotherhood that brings us back to the understanding of this white powder known as monatomic gold, which is intrinsically connected to electricity for its transmutation. And we know that this electricity, as we see and understand now in its macro manifestation, is representative of the elect tri-cities, or the special select of these three cities. Now we see that that is going to be representative of their leader, which would be the DC, and representative of the District of Columbia, which now fulfills itself as the military might, as all previous Babylonian kings have before him. We understand that this DC, now District of Columbia, is representative of a DC elect road. In other words, the elect road, the lightning. And we're going to see where this lightning comes into play with the other portion of this Jewish man's forehead. So if we have one DC elect road here on this earth, well, as below, so too above, we must have a DC elect road where? Well, that would be on the far side of the moon. The millstone In other words, this fire, aka lightning, that comes down will be the connection, in other words, the trigger for a particular event to take place, in which many of you understand I call it the second cup. It is all about some sort of meteor that comes from the sky and then, of course, crashes off of the coast of that great city. We know that that great city is commercial Babylon. So what is this phylactery going to tell us? Well, for one, it's going to link us back up, as I said, to the Washington Monument. And if we were to take a close look at what's on top of the Capitol, of the dome, of the head of the White House. Now we see that this White House has to be connected now to Ephraim's lineage via this white brotherhood of the House of Karnak. We know that Asneth is a daughter of this white brotherhood of the House of Karnak from Egypt. We see that this is no accident that Ephraim has founded his practice of this tradition and has symbolically manifested all that has to do with it along the lines of this white, in other words, this White House Brotherhood. We see that on the dome, the capital of the head, symbolically and stylized in the DC location, the District of Columbia, we're going to see the very same thing atop his head. And you're looking at it right now. So what I'm trying to tell you right now is to try to imagine the connections between these two supposed Jews. You know that by the biblical account, that Ephraim is now the leader of the lost 10 tribes. Before the tribes were split, Ephraim becomes the 13th because Jacob puts him before Manasseh in Genesis chapter 48 and 49. Now Ephraim would become the 13th tribe, the leader of Israel. We see that Israel is later divided. We see that Benjamin and Judah become the southern, symbolized by the lion. Then we see that the northern tribes, 10 in total, become the symbolism of the unicorn by default of them being led by Ephraim. Ephraim then goes from the 13th to the 11th. And then that would make Ephraim not the 11th member of the tribe, but it makes him the 11th member of the tribe. And when I say leaven, I am talking about that leaven that has spoiled the whole lump. And that leaven is intrinsically related to rising of some sort of yeast, if you would, in the making of bread, which we know is intrinsically related to manna, which is now related to monatomic gold, and how it is transmutated to get that way via the form of electricity, which now will fulfill itself as lightning. And now you see this lightning rod. The attraction for the lightning, if you will, is this goddess America. We see that this is exactly what we have on the Capitol dome at Washington, D.C. You can call this goddess any name that you would like. Ishtar, Semiramis, Isis, Hathor, Columbia, as we see here. But the whole plan that Ephraim has with this goddess is that she is to be sacrificed. She is going to die during childbirth. We know the child that they are seeking to birth would be the son of the Dark One. In other words, we see this in representation of Horus, the dark sun. Horus, symbolized with a darkened right eye, brings us intrinsically back to the moon. As we see this Columbia, I would like you to now imagine the position of this black phylactery, this black cube, this black box representing the material 4D, the 4D vessel, the material carbon vessel. Now you see the very same thing. Now, what we have to imagine is that Ephraim, interconnected into this mystery religion, intrinsically relates itself back to the seven chakras, which is then related to the seven stars, connected to those of the Pleiades, which then further connects itself to this ancient master race, which is now considered the remnant of the Anunnaki, or at least the original Anunnaki, and then their remnant turns into the Nephilim. We know that Nephilim is derived, the word Nephilim is derived from Orion. And then Orion is connected to iron, further connected to an iron meteorite, which is then worshipped by many ancient cultures and even some to this day. We know that the Egyptian civilization, at least one portion of its origination, is connected to what is known as the Ben stone, which is further considered to be an iron meteorite that had fell, a stone that had fell from heaven. Now we go to modern times. As we know, in ancient Egypt, this stone was venerated at a place called the High Sand, which is a temple that was dedicated to aka Osiris, Orion, in connection to this falling black stone of iron from heaven. We would go now to the phylactery upon the Jewish head, and we begin to see the symbolic representation of this iron meteorite. Now we would go in relationship to what I have already told you in the preparation that they need for the vessel, the body that this fallen prince would seek to enter into. In other words, aka the womb. Now, if you would imagine a rising Kundalini serpent that needs to pierce through the capital, pierce through the dome, pierce through the head of the individual that has labored to rise this serpent, we see that this serpent is seeking to enter into a material vessel. This vessel must be carbon. This vessel must be in representation of 666, which now turns itself into the mark of this beast. The vessel itself now represents itself as the material form for the spirit occupation. And then this is where we see the mother goddess come into view to provide that vessel. Because as we know, the Nephilim descendancy becomes the potential form for him to possess, for him to go into, because he must go into a atom that has already given up its free will, already voluntarily given up its seal of what is called by some people the Holy Ghost. I prefer the term infinite spirit. So I want you to see that this were to be the capital. We know that under here is that rounded dome of the White House, which is symbolic of a head. We know that the head is called a capital on top of a column. These columns are now representative of Jachin and Boaz. We know that Jachin and Boaz are two columns symbolically related to Freemasonry and mystery religions. It goes all the way back to the time of Solomon's temple and then precedes it back to the temple of Tyre, 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 Tyre. Most people pronounce it Tyre. I just prefer to pronounce it Tyre. Regardless, as we go back to this ancient civilization of merchants, if you will, we know that Solomon even used them in the building of his own temple. Therefore, these two columns, Jachin and Boaz, are related to many ancient mystery temples that precede the time of Solomon. These two columns represent the beauty and the beast, or the unification of the two. Who is seeking to unify these two things? Well, this would be the mystery worker, the great worker, that would be in semblance of Ephraim. So now we see the beauty in semblance of what we have here as Columbia atop the head of Ephraim, using this to attract the lightning. This attraction now symbolizes the lightning with the beast in reference of Satan. So the beauty and the beast, the unification of heaven and earth, is being symbolized to you right here as well as it is here. So I intend to show you how this black cube atop the forehead is the very same thing that you're seeing here atop the Capitol Dome forehead of Ephraim. Now, if you would imagine the Kundalini serpent being risen, piercing out of the top of the dome, what you see right here. Once it is pierced through the dome, what is the serpent going to enter into? It's going to enter into a womb. It's going to enter into a cube, a representation of a material vessel. Now, that should not be any surprise for many of you who have been watching my videos for a long time. 4D, representation of time-space. We see that this is a representation of the vessel form. We see the 5th D represents spirit consciousness applied to matter, but having achieved the 6th sense of spirit-perceived dimensionality. As you would look here, this is a video that I have already done that was connected to crop circles. Crop circles, incidentally, is CC. Now we know who's responsible for these supposed crop circles and their intended messages that they imply behind their geometry, which they believe is so sacred in relationship to the sacred feminine. My point is to see that the groundwork has already been done to describe this cube to you in relationship with this 4D time-space vessel form, in which this fruit of the womb is seeking to apply itself. It's seeking to apply itself not only as the 5th D conscious resident, but to become the 6th D supernatural ruler of this 4D dimensional realm. So now you could imagine that they are all calling and describing the death of America, in which now would be in semblance of this goddess here that you see atop the dome, the capital of this column known as Ephraim. So if the serpent Kundalini was sought to be risen, once it pierces through the dome of the head, we see that it is instantly going back into a womb. In other words, that is referred to as being born again. Born again, I would have to call this a bastardized version of the very real understanding of being born spiritually again. But what we see this is being born materially again. Once this takes place, the attraction using the feminine virgin to attract this lightning to unify itself with heaven and earth, we know what happens. That this goddess is destroyed, that she dies in bearing this child, in which the Bible calls a woman in travail. We know that they have divided the portion of the woman along 2 lines, which is representative of ecclesiastical and material. They believe the only portion that they are seeking to destroy would be the material portion of Babylon, therefore rebearing her as a spiritual creation. But we know with the understanding of how this is all coming to play that they are rebearing her as a material bastardization, not going into the potential, but going away from the potential. In other words, seeking to enter back into the material womb, rather than becoming a sovereign being of this supposed independence that they seek, aka this ultimate freedom to do as thou wilt. We see that by default of following this serpent as their leader, he is leading them back into the womb from which they've came. Now, they would be in belief that this womb is in representation of the ancient golden age, but this is an embryonic state. This is a cellular state. This is a de-evolved state of the potential and pinnacle of man, of which we now currently see him. They would seek to lead you back into the darkness. They would seek to lead you back into the dependence. They would seek to lead you away from your potential and put you back into the darkness of this vessel-formed cube. And as you can see, this is what we have taking place. Now, if we were to imagine this goddess America about it before, these 10 lightning rods, at least in my mind, represent the 10 lost tribes, which are now in reference ruled by this leaven, which is a now connection to Leviathan, which is then connected to Levite priests. And then we know that Levite is root for levitate, which connects us back to the Ark of the Covenant, bringing us once again back to elect Tri-City and those two special electrodes known as the cherubims of the Ark. One cherub is the DC electrode on one side, the other cherub is the DC electrode on the other. Thus, connecting the two electrodes creates the electricus, which became so dangerous to anyone but the supposed Levite priests that were authorized to bear it. Now, as you should understand, Leviathan becomes the serpent in which they are seeking to rise, aka levitate, which now brings about who the Levite priests are and what their great mission is to do. And that is, of course, to disturb the waterline so that they can bring their chaotic serpent through. Unfortunately, we had an audio outage, and I don't remember in what portion it was. So I would like you to think about a few things here, and I'm most likely going to stop this video. This has basically been the introduction for what I'm going to further back up using all of the material from the videos that we have already gone over in this channel for the last 3 years. Symbols and connections and charts and diagrams which will reveal what I'm telling you now is the truth. Just as you are beginning to see the connections here, and you will begin to see these connections further. So I believe I have a very exciting video, and we will come back to this chart here, which is in representation of what I just told you. Notice the cube here, and then notice what's at the center of the cube that has been divided, which now becomes the vehicle for this plan, for this practice, for this tradition, for this original intent of this supposed designer in his creation of divinity. Remember that the cube itself, as we divided it with the X, did what? Created fours. 1 4 here, the other 4 here mirrored. As above, so too below. The 44 in representation of this cube as we are seeing it unfold, which now makes perfect sense with this individual wearing the cube on his forehead. The serpent needs a material vessel to enter into, and I will show you further how the cube represents that material vessel, how it will link back up to this carbon atom form, which will then link back up to the tetrahedron, which will then link back up to the morula, the embryonic stage of growth of any animal or vegetable. In other words, any biological being goes through an embryonic phase known as the morula, which we know the females are seen as the cow to birth this cowboy ruler, which now is connected to these bulls that originally seeded them, known as the Anunnaki. I'll be back.